The sun was rising earlier now, and each morning in the Williams mansion felt full of new promise. Aurora's world had changed completely. She still used her wheelchair most of the time, but there was a new strength in her body and a new fire in her heart. She was no longer the broken girl who once stared at the ceiling in silence. She had become someone who smiled, who painted, who dreamed again. And beside her, every step of the way, was Mabel. It had been almost 6 months since Mabel first whispered those words, "I'll help her." No one knew then how powerful those words would become. What started as a whisper had turned into a full journey of healing for both of them. Aurora could now lift her arms easily. She had full control of her fingers and could even feed herself, paint without help, and write in her journal again. Her legs still weren't strong enough to walk on their own, but she had taken a few steps using the walker. To her, that felt like flying. And to Mabel, it felt like watching a miracle. One morning, Aurora sat in her wheelchair, facing a blank canvas. She held a paintbrush in her hand and looked outside the window. "Mabel," she said softly, "I think I want to paint you today, Mabel." Laughed. "Me? Oh no, baby. I don't belong on no canvas." But Aurora was serious. "Yes, you do. We're the reason all these other paintings happened." Mabel blushed and turned away, pretending to fix the pillows. But her eyes were watery. No one had ever painted her before. No one had ever said she was worth that kind of beauty. For the next few hours, Aurora painted. Mabel sat nearby, reading a book and humming old gospel songs. The brush moved smoothly in Aurora's hand. No, 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 color by color, she brought Mabel to life on the canvas, not just how she looked, but how she felt. Strong, gentle, loving, brave. When she finished, she turned the painting around. "Here," she said with a proud smile. "This is the woman who saved me." Mabel looked at the picture and then at Aurora. "You saved me too, baby," she said. "You just don't know it." Aurora tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Mabel sat down and held her hand. "After I lost my daughter, I stopped living. I kept working, cleaning, doing my job, but my heart was gone. I didn't think I'd ever feel love like that again, and I met you." Aurora didn't say a word, just squeezed Mabel's hand tightly. "You brought my heart back to life," Mabel whispered. "Helping you helped me remember who I used to be, who I still am." In that moment, they weren't Maid and Patient. We're family. Soon, Aurora began talking about something she hadn't mentioned before. Her future. "I don't want to. Just stay home," she said one day. "I want to help other girls like me, girls who feel like they've lost everything." Mabel nodded. "That's a beautiful dream. I want to start a center," Aurora said. "A place where girls with disabilities can paint, speak, learn, and heal." Martin loved the idea. He offered to fund the entire project. But Aurora had one condition. "Mabel has to be my partner," she said. This was her dream too. She just didn't get the chance to live it. Mabel tried to say, "No, I'm not trained for that, baby. I don't know nothing about running a center. You know everything that matters," Aurora replied. "You know how to heal people's hearts." And so, the Sunflower House was born. It was a beautiful building, full of bright rooms, large windows, and walls covered with paintings. Many of the paintings were by Aurora herself. Sunflowers, skies, people smiling. One wall had only one painting, the one she did of Mabel. Right under it were the words, "She whispered hope into my silence." Girls and women from all over the city began coming to the Sunflower House. Some had injuries, some had lost family. Some just needed someone to listen. And there they found what they needed. Not just therapy, but kindness. Not just programs, but people who truly cared. Mabel walked through the halls every day, hugging the girls, telling stories, helping them paint. She had no official title, but everyone called her Mama Mabel. One afternoon, a little girl in a wheelchair came up to her and asked, "Are you the lady from the painting?" Mabel laughed and said, "I guess I am." "You look like a hero," the girl said shyly. Mabel knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, heroes aren't always in capes. Sometimes They just bring a warm blanket and stay by your side. Years passed. Aurora continued to get stronger. She learned to walk with support. She even gave speeches at events, telling her story not for fame, but to inspire others who felt lost. At one event, she stood on stage with Mabel beside her. The crowd was quiet as she spoke. There was a time when I thought my life was over. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, and didn't want to live. Then someone walked into my room not with a medical degree or fancy words, but with love. She looked at Mabel. She didn't try to fix me. She just stayed, and her presence became my medicine. The crowd stood and clapped not just for Aurora, but for Mabel. After the event, someone asked Mabel how she had done it, how she had helped Aurora so much without being a doctor or a therapist. Mabel smiled and said, "I just loved her through it, that's all." Sometimes love is the strongest medicine of all. The story of Aurora and Mabel was told in books, in schools, and even in a small documentary. But to them, the best part of the journey wasn't the awards or attention. It was the mornings in the garden. Just the two of them. A cup of tea, a canvas, a breeze. One day, as they sat watching the sunflowers sway in the wind, Aurora looked at Mabel and said, "I still remember the first thing you said to me." Mabel smiled. "So do I. You whispered, 'I'll help her,' and I meant it." Mabel replied. Aurora looked at the sky. "And you did, more than you know." They sat in silence for a long while, both smiling, both full of peace. The wind gently brushed through the flowers, and it almost felt like a whisper, soft and kind, because sometimes a whisper can change a life, and sometimes it can change too. The days slowly turned into weeks, and Aurora continued to surprise everyone. What once seemed impossible was now becoming a part of her daily life. She was no longer the silent girl lying in bed, lost in pain and sadness. Her voice had returned. Her hands were moving more, and most of all, her eyes had life again. She smiled more often, now sometimes softly, sometimes fully on each time. Mabel would smile too, proud and quiet. Aurora had grown used to her daily routines with Mabel. They painted in the mornings and listened to soft music in the afternoons. On good days, Aurora would practice lifting small objects with her fingers. And on hard days, Mabel would hold her hand and say, "We're not giving up today." One morning, something new happened. As Mabel helped her stretch her arms, Aurora said, "I think I can feel something in my legs." She sounded unsure, almost afraid to hope. Mabel stopped and looked into her eyes. "What do you feel, sweetheart?" "It's like a little tingle. Like my toes are waking up," Aurora said, whispering. Mabel placed her hand on Aurora's feet and smiled gently. "Baby, that's more than nothing. That's something." Later, the doctor came to examine her. After a few tests, he looked amazed. "There's a slight return of nerve response," he said to Martin. "It's still early, but her body may be trying to heal." Martin was speechless. His eyes filled with tears as he turned toward Mabel. "You did this," he said. Again, but Mabel simply smiled and said she did it herself. "I just stayed beside her." The therapist increased the intensity of the sessions. Aurora was now able to sit upright without help, and she could slowly move her arms more confidently. Mabel started helping her practice daily rolling a ball. Back and forth on the bed, squeezing a sponge, holding a cup of water one day. Mabel brought a small wooden board with letters on it. "Let's play a new game," she said with a grin. Aurora tilted her head, curious. "You're going to spell out your dreams," Mabel said. She pointed to the board and said, "Tell me one thing you wish for." Aurora took a deep breath and slowly tapped the letters with her finger. WLK. Mabel's smile didn't fade. "We're going to aim for that. Even if it's just a few steps, we'll try together." But not everyone believed in this dream. Some of the staff still whispered behind closed doors. "Not realistic," one said. "She's only giving false hope," another added, referring to Mabel. One day a young nurse said loudly in the hallway, "This maid isn't a doctor. Why does she think she can help?" Mabel heard it but didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Aurora did. That evening, while the nurse was helping her get ready for bed, Aurora looked at her directly and said, "She gave me what you never did hope." The nurse blushed and apologized softly. From then on, no one dared to question Mabel's place in the house. Martin began noticing more changes too. He saw how Mabel didn't just help his daughter's body, but her spirit. And he also saw something else, how the world outside still looked at Mabel as just a maid. Not knowing the miracle she was making inside his home, he invited a famous reporter to visit. Not for publicity, but to tell the story. At first, the reporter assumed the doctors had done the impossible. But when she entered Aurora's room and saw her laughing while painting sunflowers with Mabel, she asked, "Who is this woman?" Aurora answered clearly, "This is the reason I'm still alive." The interview was aired nationwide. It showed Aurora's journey, how she went from silent tears to soft laughter, from frozen fingers to painting sunflowers. But most of all, it showed Mabel standing quietly by Aurora's side, her hands gentle, her eyes kind, her presence constant. People across the country were touched. They wrote letters, sent gifts, and some even called her an angel. But Mabel didn't like the attention. "I'm not an angel," she said one evening to Martin. "Just someone who knows what loss feels like, and didn't want another girl to feel it alone." Later that week, Aurora asked to be wheeled into the garden. The air was fresh, the flowers were blooming, and the sun warmed her skin. "I want to try something today," she said. Mabel raised her eyebrows. "What's that?" Aurora smiled. "I want to stand. Just once, even if it's only for a second." Mabel didn't say no. She never said no to a dream. With the help of a walker and some cushions, they brought Aurora to the edge of her wheelchair. Mabel held her gently from behind. "Take your time," Mabel whispered. "No rush." Aurora breathed deeply. Her arms trembled as she pushed herself up. Her legs felt like they were made of jelly. But slowly, she rose a few inches above the chair. Mabel gasped softly, "You're doing it, baby." Aurora stood shaking, sweating, but smiling. After a few seconds, she sat back down, tears in her eyes. Not from pain, from joy. "I did it," she whispered. "Yes, you did," Mabel replied, hugging her tightly. "And next time, you'll do even more." That evening, Martin held a quiet dinner at home, just a few close friends. He stood up and made a toast. "To the woman who walked into our home with a mop and walked out with our hearts." Mabel blushed and looked down, but Aurora raised her glass and added, "And to the whisper that became a promise, I'll help her." The room clapped softly. There were no fireworks, no grand stage, no medals. Just love, respect, and the quiet celebration of a journey that was still unfolding. And while many people watched Aurora's recovery with amazement, only a few knew the truth, that it wasn't science alone that brought her back. It was belief. It was patience. And most of all, it was a woman who had once lost everything and chose to turn her pain into purpose. The journey wasn't over. There were still hard days, painful days, but Aurora was no longer afraid because now she wasn't walking alone. She had Mabel. Let me know when you're ready for part 5. And I'll continue with the same heartfelt, uplifting tone and simple. Every day began to feel a little different in the Williams mansion. There was a soft glow in the air now, like the morning sun breaking through clouds after a long storm. Aurora was changing little by little. But what no one outside the house saw was how deep that change really was, and how it was Mabel, quiet Maid, who made it possible. Aurora had started whispering small words again. Sunflower, music, hope. She still couldn't move her legs, but she had begun trying with her arms and fingers. Her hands were weak and shaky, but she wanted to do things. Even simple things like holding a spoon or brushing her hair with Mabel's help made her feel more alive. Mabel saw something in Aurora that no one else did, a will to fight, hidden behind silence. But she also saw the sadness, the heavy pain Aurora carried inside. Some days, Aurora's eyes would go dark again. Her hands would stop moving and her voice would disappear. On those days, Mabel didn't push. She simply sat beside her, sometimes In silence, sometimes reading poetry or singing softly. She knew healing wasn't a straight road. Some days were hard, but Mabel was patient. One afternoon, as Mabel was folding laundry in the corner of the room, Aurora surprised her. She said something unexpected, her voice still low and breathy. "Why, me?" Mabel stopped folding. She looked up. "What do you mean, baby? Why did this happen to me?" Aurora asked. "It was good. I didn't hurt anyone." The room fell quiet. Mabel walked over and sat beside her. "I asked the same question when my daughter got sick," Mabel said. "She was 10, sweet as honey, never even swatted a fly. And yet she was taken away." Aurora looked at her with soft, tired eyes. "Did it ever stop hurting?" Mabel shook her head. "No, baby, it didn't. But I learned something. The pain changes shape. First it's heavy, like a stone in your chest. But later it becomes something else, something softer. It reminds you that you loved someone so deeply, it left a mark." Aurora blinked slowly. Mabel continued, "I can't take away your pain, but I can sit with you in it. You're not alone, Aurora. You don't have to carry it by yourself anymore." For a moment, Aurora closed her eyes. She didn't speak, but a tear slid down her cheek. Mabel wiped it gently. From that day on, their bond grew even stronger. Aurora began sharing her thoughts, little by little. She spoke of her dreams, how she once wanted to open a school for disabled children, how she loved painting fields of flowers. Mabel listened like these words were treasures, holding each one close. One evening, the physical therapist came again. She was kind but serious. She gave Aurora hand exercises and worked with her shoulder movements. After the session, she sat with Martin in the hallway. "She's improving," the therapist said. "But medically, we have to be realistic. Her chances of walking again are still very low." Martin sighed. "I understand. But what about hope?" The therapist paused. "Hope is powerful, but we must balance it with care. We don't want her to be disappointed." Mabel stood at the corner, listening quietly. She didn't speak, but in her heart, she didn't accept the idea of giving up. Not on Aurora, not while her spirit was still trying. Later that night, Mabel brought a small bowl of warm water and a towel into Aurora's room. She began gently wiping Aurora's hands and massaging her fingers. "You know," she said softly, "my grandmother believed the body remembers. Even when it forgets how to move, the soul remembers." Aurora looked curious. "How do you mean?" She used to say healing isn't just science. It's spirit, love, belief. She helped women give birth with her hands, with herbs, with songs. No doctor, just heart. "Did it work?" Aurora asked. Mabel smiled. "Most times, yes. And when it didn't, she still stayed. Because being there matters." Aurora let her head rest back on the pillow. "Stay," she whispered. Mabel touched her hand gently. "Always." The next morning, Mabel came in early with a surprise. She carried a small wooden tray with paintbrushes, sponges, and tiny bottles of paint. She had also brought a blank canvas. "I thought maybe your fingers were ready for something new," she said. Aurora's eyes lit up. With Mabel's help, she held a brush between her fingers. It was hard. The brush slipped once, twice. But on the third try, she made a soft stroke of yellow across the canvas. "Sunflower," she whispered. Mabel grinned. "That's my girl." They spent the whole morning painting. Aurora made simple shaped circles, lines, dots, but each one felt like a miracle. When Martin walked in and saw the canvas, he was stunned. It wasn't just a painting. It was proof of life coming back. Mabel wrote the date on the back of the canvas. The day she started again. From then on, painting became part of their routine. Some days Aurora had energy. Other days she didn't. Mabel never made her feel guilty. She simply adjusted. She read stories on the slow days and on the better ones. They painted or played soft games to help Aurora move her arms. At the same time, Mabel continued teaching the staff how to speak gently around Aurora. She hears everything. She would say speak life, not fear. One day a new nurse said, "She probably won't get much better." Mabel walked up and looked her in the eye. "Don't say that where she can hear you," Mabel said calmly. "We're building something here and doubt doesn't belong in the walls." The nurse nodded, ashamed. Martin began spending more time at home. He took breaks from his work, sat with Aurora during her painting time, and listened to Mabel's stories too. At first he didn't know how to open up, but watching Mabel helped him learn. He started reading to Aurora. He asked her questions. He cried beside her once. When he did, Aurora whispered, "It's okay, Dad. I'm still here." Words broke something open in him. The man who had once built companies was now learning how to rebuild something greater, his connection with his daughter. One afternoon, the media called asking for an update on Aurora's condition. Martin's team wanted to write a statement. They suggested not mentioning Mabel. "She's not trained. It's better to credit the medical team," but Martin refused. "If you leave her out," he said, "then I won't say a word." The statement went public. Mabel's name was right there. Our daughter's healing began when Mabel Johnson walked into our home. She didn't just clean our rooms, she cleaned our hearts. Still, Mabel didn't change. She came in the next day, same lavender soap, same gentle smile, and she whispered to Aurora, "Let's make some sunshine today." They picked up a yellow paintbrush, painted another sunflower, because the journey wasn't over yet, but it was no longer hopeless. Let me know when you're ready for part 4, and I'll continue with the same emotional, respectful, and Aurora lay in her bed, just as she had for weeks. This time, things felt different. She could still hear the quiet sounds of machines beside her, but something new had entered her world. It was Mabel's voice, soft, calm, and full of warmth. A voice that didn't ask anything from her. A voice that simply stayed. Mabel came each day, never missing a morning. She didn't wear perfume, but she always smelled like lavender soap. Her hands moved gently as she cleaned the room or folded clothes, and her words floated in the air like feathers. She didn't speak loudly or act like a nurse. She wasn't trying to fix Aurora. She was simply present. At first, Aurora just listened. She said nothing. But inside her heart, something had started to move. It was like a small seed in dry soil finally being touched by water. She didn't know how or why, but Mabel made her feel safe. Mabel didn't treat her like a broken doll or a problem to solve. She spoke to her like a friend. One morning, Mabel brought in a small radio. She placed it on the table near the window and turned the dial. A soft jazz song filled the air. Aurora's eyes blinked slowly. It had been months since music played. In her room, Mabel smiled. "This was my daughter's favorite song," she said quietly. She used to hum it while brushing her hair, even when she was sick. Aurora blinked again. She didn't know why that sentence stayed with her. Maybe it was the way Mabel spoke about her daughter, not with sadness, but with love. There was a strength in her voice, a kind of quiet power. Aurora wanted to ask about her, but her lips still wouldn't move. The next day, Belle brought a small notebook with colorful drawings inside. She opened to a page that showed a little girl holding a sunflower. "My daughter drew this when she was 9, she explained. "She believed flowers listened when you spoke to them." Aurora's eyes stayed on the picture. For a moment, her finger twitched. Mabel noticed. She didn't say anything, but her heart filled with hope. Every day Mabel shared more, she told. Stories about growing up in the South, learning to cook cornbread, and dancing barefoot on the porch during the summer rain. She spoke of her late husband, a kind man who played the guitar, and of the pain of losing both him and their daughter years apart. But even in her sadness, Mabel found light. "Grief," she said once, "is just love with nowhere to go. But when you give that love to someone else, it becomes healing." Those words stayed in the room long after Mabel left. One afternoon, Aurora's therapist came in and began her usual routine. She asked Aurora to try and squeeze her hand. Aurora didn't respond. The therapist sighed and shook her head. "Lily, try again tomorrow," she said. But after she left, Mabel sat beside Aurora and gently took her hand. "Let's not wait till tomorrow," she whispered. She didn't ask Aurora to move her fingers. She just held her hand and began singing a soft tune. Slowly, Aurora's eyes closed. For the first time in months, she felt peace. That night, she dreamed not of the accident or the pain but of flowers, music, and sunlight. The next morning, something unexpected happened. As Mabel was dusting the windowsill, Aurora's voice came out. Faint, broken, but real. "Sun, flower." Mabel turned sharply, eyes wide. She dropped the cloth and rushed to the bed. "What did you say, baby?" Aurora tried again, her throat dry. "Sunflower." Mabel's eyes filled with tears. She held Aurora's hand gently and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Just like the drawing." Later that day, Martin was told his daughter had spoken. He rushed up the stairs, breathless. When he entered the room, Aurora looked at him, not past him, at him. He froze. "Dad," she whispered. He fell to his knees beside her bed, tears falling down his cheeks. He hadn't heard her say that word since before the accident. He kissed her forehead and looked at Mabel. "You did this," he said in disbelief. Mabel shook her head softly. "She did it. I just stayed long enough for her to find her voice." The house began to change after that. Nurses no longer rushed. In and out like strangers, the music stayed on longer. Fresh flowers returned to the tables. Aurora started whispering more words. Sometimes they didn't come out clearly, but she tried. And every time she did, Mabel clapped softly and smiled like it was the greatest achievement in the world. One afternoon, Mabel brought in a tiny basket filled with small, smooth stones. Each one had a word painted on it. Hope, love, strength. She placed them beside Aurora's bed. "Pick one," she said gently. Aurora pointed to Hope. "Good choice," Mabel whispered. "Let's keep that one close." The days passed. Aurora started participating in her therapy. Slowly, she tried moving her fingers, then her wrists. It was hard, and it hurt, but she kept going. Mabel was always there, not pushing, just cheering. Sometimes, Mabel would tell jokes or bring silly hats and place one on Aurora's head just to make her smile. It worked. One day, Aurora even giggled. Soft, weak laugh, but real. Martin stood in the hallway watching, holding back tears. He knew now that healing wasn't just about doctors and machines. It was about love, patience, and presence. Soon, Aurora asked for paints again. She couldn't hold the brush properly, but Mabel helped her. Together, they painted a large sunflower on canvas. Aurora titled it, "Still Growing." On the back, she wrote her first full sentence since the accident. "Because someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." That someone was Mabel, but Mabel never made it about herself. When people asked how she did it, she always said, "I just listened." Sometimes that's all someone needs. The family began to see Mabel not just as a maid, but as something more. She had entered their home as a helper. Now, she was part of their story. A quiet presence who refused to give up on a broken girl, but Mabel had her own secret. She was healing too. Helping Aurora had brought her closer to her lost daughter. Every time Aurora smiled, it felt like her daughter was smiling too. Every laugh, every word was like music that softened the pain she had carried for years, and so, without loud applause or medals, Mabel did something no one else could. She reached into the silent heart of a girl who had lost everything and gave her back. Something more powerful than medicine. She gave her hope, and it all began with one whisper, "I'll help her." Aurora Williams was not just any girl. She was the daughter of one of the richest men in the country, Martin Williams, a tech billionaire who owned several companies. Their mansion stood on a quiet hill outside San Francisco, surrounded by gardens, fountains, and glass walls that reflected the golden California sun. Aurora had everything: fame, money, and beauty. She loved horse riding, painting, and spending weekends organizing charity events for sick children. Everyone saw her smile and called her lucky. But no one knew how fast life could change. It was a rainy Thursday in November. Aurora had just left her art class and was on her way to meet her father for lunch. She always drove fast, but this time the roads were slippery. On a narrow curve, her car skidded and spun out of control. It hit a tree and flipped. Everything went silent after that. The next time Aurora opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed. The bright lights above her hurt her eyes. She tried to move, but nothing happened. Her legs felt like stone, her arms heavy. Panic rushed through her. Nurses rushed in, calling her name. Doctors stood around her with serious faces. They spoke softly, but their words felt like thunder. Aurora was paralyzed from the waist down. The accident had damaged her spine. The news hit the Williams family like a storm. Martin Williams, a man known for controlling the stock market and winning tech battles, was now helpless. He stood by his daughter's side every day, hoping to see a smile, a word, anything. But Aurora said nothing. Her eyes were open, but her spirit was shut. The hospital room became cold. Aurora refused to talk, to eat properly, or even to look anyone in the eye. After a month, she was moved back to the mansion, now with medical machines, nurses, and a physical therapist who visited twice a day. But none of them could reach her. She just lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, trapped. In her own sadness, weeks passed. Nurses came and went. Some were kind, others were impatient. The therapist said Aurora needed to try harder. One even said she was wasting her chance. But no one understood how deep her pain was. Not just the pain in her body, but the pain of losing everything she loved. Her freedom, her hobbies, her smile, her hope. One morning, a new maid arrived. At the house, her name was Mabel Johnson. She was quiet, almost invisible at first. A 58-year-old black woman with soft eyes and strong arms. She had worked in many homes before, some kind, some cruel, but she never judged. She cleaned with care, moved gently, and never asked questions. Mabel noticed Aurora the first time she brought fresh towels into her room. The girl lay still, eyes open, but empty. Everyone else treated Aurora like glass, fragile and cold. But Mabel saw something else. She noticed the small things. How Aurora blinked twice when the sunlight hit her face. How her fingers moved slightly when a song played faintly from the hallway. Mabel didn't say anything, not yet. Days turned into a week. Mabel cleaned the room quietly. She saw that no one spoke to Aurora with warmth. Everything was medical, cold, distant. The staff spoke around her, not to her. Even her father, though present, didn't know what to say anymore. Then one morning, Mabel was placing flowers on the table beside Aurora's bed. The girl's eyes followed the movement. Mabel paused, looked directly into her eyes, and whispered so gently that only Aurora could hear, "I'll help her." It was just a few words, not shouted, not written, just whispered. But something shifted in the room. The next day, Mabel returned with fresh sheets and a small book of poems. She didn't ask for permission, simply sat beside Aurora and began. Reading softly, her voice was like warm tea on a cold morning. She read about the wind, about hope, about rivers that find their way through mountains. Aurora didn't blink, but Mabel kept reading. Every morning after that, Mabel returned with something, a story, a memory, a song from her youth. She told Aurora about growing up in Georgia, about her mother's cooking, about her daughter who used to love sunflowers. Slowly, she created a world around Aurora that didn't smell like medicine or sound like therapy. It smelled like cinnamon, and sounded like laughter. One day, as Mabel was telling a story about her daughter's favorite shoes, something amazing happened. A tear rolled down Aurora's cheek. It's just one. But it was enough. Mabel didn't rush or celebrate. She simply wiped the tear and said softly, "It's okay to feel again." Later that evening, Martin came home. The nurse told him there had been a change. He rushed upstairs, thinking maybe it was a medical update. But what he saw stunned him. His daughter, silent for months, was now holding a small wooden spoon in her hand. Her grip was weak, her hand shaking, but she was trying. And beside her, Mabel stood calm and smiling. Martin asked Mabel what she had done. She looked at him and replied, "I spoke to her heart, not just her body." It was the beginning of something new. Aurora didn't speak yet. She didn't walk. But there was a spark in her eyes, a small one, but real. Mabel had seen it before. She knew the path ahead was long and hard. But she also knew Aurora had taken the first step, not with her feet, but with her soul. And it had started with a whisper.